Hi, and welcome back to
Inspired to Game. I'm Sean.
And I am Lola. Today, we are talking about Tiny Epic Crimes, as well as its expansion, Kingpins. Now, to begin, I want to thank Gameland Games for sending us a copy of these to review. This is a 1 to 4 player game, and before we get into the review, we'll give you a quick overview of how to play.
This is the city, Echo Ridge. The case, the murder of Donnie Moretti, the mayor's son. You and your fellow officers have 48 hours to solve the case before the city erupts in gang war. In a game of Tiny Epic Crimes, each player starts with a player power. On their turn, they will spend time to optionally move throughout the city and then take a mandatory action, even if it's taking a coffee break. Once enough clues of a certain type have been gathered, the player who gathered the most recent clue is allowed to look at the murderer card through the corresponding evidence envelope. The window in the evidence envelope will reveal certain information about the murderer and allow the player to eliminate certain suspects. As the game progresses, events will appear at random spaces throughout the city. While they are in play, these events will provide hurdles that the players must overcome, and they also provide an opportunity, once resolved, for the player to gain a benefit, such as gaining a suspect card or sharing information with another player. The game is over once all players believe they have identified the murderer. Then you check the answer and determine the winner. In the Kingpins expansion, while searching for the murderer of Donnie Moretti, you are also trying to capture the criminal kingpin behind the whole thing.
So we don't usually keep games here when we're reviewing them because they're usually too big. But these ones are tiny.
Yet epic.
Nice. So first, I want to talk about Tiny Epic Games in general. So if you are not familiar with the Tiny Epic Games line, you should check them out because there are a plethora of them and there's so many different genres. There is even currently a Kickstarter campaign for a new one for Tiny Epic Cthulhu, as if that isn't the best oxymoron ever. So the thing I really like about the Tiny Epic Games is they put so much game into such a small package.
Yeah.
Like you would expect a game that's about this size to be simple with a few components and probably play for maybe about 20-30 minutes. But these games, when you set them out, they almost usually make their own board. They have a lot of complexity to them and they often actually play for at least an hour, if not more. So there's a lot of complexity in them for being such a little game. And because they're such little games, that means they have cute little tiny components, and I love that.
Yeah, the components are fantastic. They're either meeples or little statues, but whatever they are, they're always dead point on theme and just, as Lola said, just absolutely adorable to fit in that little tiny box.
Yeah, so as far as the components with this game, one of the things that I really love is the envelopes where you put in the suspect card. So it's a really fun mechanism to the game where, so like Clue, you choose a card that is going to be your murderer from the various suspects and put it into the murderer envelope. And from there, you try to gather your clues in order to gather the evidence. And when you get evidence, you get to look at that murderer card through that particular envelope, depending on the evidence you're looking at, and find out one attribute about them. Now, it might be what the murder weapon was. It might have been how they did the getaway or what gang they're part of. But each time you're able to eliminate a huge amount of the suspects from your pool, which is very satisfying and fun.
Each bit of evidence seems to cut the suspect pool down by about half, unless you're really unlucky.
Yeah, and you do have opportunities to gain suspect cards individually through the game as well. And these take a lot longer to find anything out, so it is important to gather these evidences. Now, I want to specify that we have only played this at a 2-player count, and this is a 2-player review of the game, and we played it competitively as well as cooperatively, and are going to compare those two. So in the competitive game, what's really exciting about it is that race for getting to the third clue. So it's not collecting 3 clues, it's whoever collects that third clue who is going to get that evidence. And that's huge to get that evidence. Now, however, if it wasn't you, you're going to get a suspect card, and by doing events, you're going to have an ability to perchance look at somebody else's evidence that they got. So you have an opportunity when you play your cards just right to get to look at that evidence as well.
If you have contributed to gathering the clues of that specific type,
Yes.
that's when you get a suspect card. If your opponent
Yes.
was lucky enough to sweep the board of those clues by themselves, you get nothing.
Yeah, that is a
Good
really
day,
good
sir.
point. Yeah, so that is where too, while you're racing to get that third, you also want to try to get on each, because at least if you're on it, you're going to get a suspect card. And you have to have a suspect card in order to trade information to get to look at that evidence. I find that it adds a lot of spiciness to it as you're racing around and also doing events strategically in order to get access to the information that you want to get. What adds to it as well is there are only certain actions you can do at certain times of the day. So a stakeout is done overnight. Talking to an informant is done during the daytime. So each one has their specified time. So as you go along, you are specifically keeping an eye on where you are in the time, but also where your opponent is at, and trying to time it all just right.
Because the mechanic is that whoever is furthest back on the time track is the person that gets the next turn. If you play your cards right, and sometimes literally if you play your cards right, you can get 2 turns in a row.
Yeah, that is absolutely possible. So you're playing around with how you're using the time as well. So if somebody races ahead, well, now you can take advantage if you can do things in a short amount of time to get extra actions in. This isn't always really possible though too, because each movement you make on the board represents 1 hour, and you only move orthogonally. So say if you need to do something and it's about 3 spaces away, well, you're automatically going to have 3 there unless you have a force card that can help you. Now the force cards are cards that offer you benefits. You can only have 2 at a time, and you're awarded them by solving events and collecting clues that move your badge up on the track.
An hour to drive 1 city block. Eey.
I know.
Traffic must be hell.
No kidding. Now, the cooperative is always nice. We always enjoy a cooperative game because we get to work together. There's no animosity. It's so friendly, and it was a little boring too, at least in comparison. And so we definitely prefer the competitive mode of this game because although the cooperative mode, we are working together more, it was just a little boring. There was a little less strategy to it, whereas the competitive was spicier and it was exciting and it had that thrill of trying to beat each other and trying to work around things, and it had pretty much just more strategy to it that made it more interesting, captivating. One thing about the cooperative game is you don't have that restriction with the time elements as far as when you can do certain actions. However, you do have restrictions in the different officers. So you each have a specific role which is only able to do certain things. So if one of you can pick up informants, maybe the other one can do the searches. So it does require a certain amount of extra cooperation and coordination specifically to make sure to get those done, with also keeping up on the events so that they don't get too overwhelming. And our first game, we were actually terrified of the events. And so we felt like we could never get to the evidence because we can't let the too many events action happen, because then we're losing suspects and that can't happen. But then we found we weren't able to collect clues to get evidence, which is the crux of the game, because we were just otherwise being overwhelmed by events. And we actually scrapped that game in the middle because we're like, we're not doing this. And we started all over again, and we kind of got it. And we thought, okay, well, you can do some events, but you don't have to stress them. And by the next game too, we hardly even cared about them. We did them when they were convenient only, because even the penalty of losing a suspect with the too many events isn't actually a big deal, because we really rely on the evidence. Like, the evidence brings us in pretty much all of our answers. So it is great to look at a suspect here and there, but generally it all comes down to the evidence. So being more relaxed and knowing that, okay, we can get the events taken care of as we want to, but it's not the most crucial of all things, really helped us get a smoother game flowing.
Yeah, eliminating suspects by looking at a single suspect card is really relying on luck more than the logic of eliminating an entire group of them by looking at some actual evidence.
Yeah, and then half the time you've looked at some evidence and then you get to look at a suspect card and it overlaps and you didn't learn anything anyway. So, yeah.
Like, oh look, I knew that.
Now, the Kingpins, I really love the monuments and the Kingpin minis. They're really great, and I love that this adds a component as you bust the flop houses and get to turn over and see what the attributes of the Kingpin are. You get to determine or help determine what the final Kingpin is going to be. Now, the reason you want to do this is because you each start in Kingpins with a cold case to solve. Now, this basically gives you an advantage of moving your badge a couple times, so it gives you a reward if the Kingpin attribute that's part of your cold case turns out to be the Kingpin that comes up. So it's just a bit of a bonus, but it's fun to see who winds up coming out, and then you put them out onto the board, and now you're chasing them down. You have to eliminate 2 more of those attributed flop houses and then go and pick them up. So it makes a really nice addition to the game, and it doesn't interfere too much with the game. So you're still playing the game as usual. This is added onto it. It's not too much, and I think it actually nicely rounds out the game.
It gives you more things to do, more things to shoot for, and just something to keep you busy in the city.
I do like it with the expansion best, so if you have it or you're thinking to get it, I do recommend getting Kingpins as well, because it is a really nice addition to it. And I'm not a huge expansion person. We do not automatically get expansions to our games because a lot of times we find we prefer them straight up as is. But this is one of those cases where I think it definitely adds to it. Now, you don't want to get this game thinking that there's going to be a lot of deduction, because there isn't. So you collect clues to get evidence, and it's all right in front of you. So it's a nice aspect of the game, but there isn't a lot of deduction. There is a good amount of luck in the game, especially because some of these places where you're gathering clues is a push your luck mechanism. So for example, if you're doing a stakeout, you risk a certain amount of time based on how long you're going to be sitting there. Is it going to be 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours? And you decide what you're going to risk, and then you flip it over. If that turned out to be 5 hours, then you don't get that stakeout clue. You weren't there long enough for. So there is, through all the events, through everything, there is a good amount of luck in this game. So you must be aware of that in going into it, that there's some strategy and it's luck, and it's actually a really nice mix of the two.
And I really love the mechanic of the time track. It really ties into the theme of the, putting in the hours of doing the police work and gathering that evidence and those clues so that you can identify the final suspect and get your man. And then artwork and everything ties into that theme just beautifully.
Yeah, the theme is really strong with it. And with mentioning the time track, I love a game that does that. Instead of just your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn, back and forth, I always love a mechanism where you're moving on a time track. So if you do something that takes more time, well, you're further ahead, and yeah, maybe I get a few turns. And it's always really fun to have something like that, because it gives you some agency as far as your movements go, and because you get to choose whether you're going to be doing the action that requires more time or more travel. So you're going to be further ahead, or are you going to do the thing that's going to take you a little less and maybe get in another turn sooner? So I really enjoy that agency that it has in this game. All right, so if you are interested in Tiny Epic Crimes, I think if you like their genre, if you like tiny epic games, if you like a good mix of some strategy and some luck component to it, if this sounds like fun, check it out. Thank you so much for watching our video today.
And if you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe.
And as always, happy gaming, folks. Today, we are talking about Tiny Epic Games, as well as its expansion, Kingpins.
But which one? Today we're talking about Tiny Epic Games.
Oh, did I
and
see
its
that?
expansion. Each player in... can't remember the name of the game.
Tiny Epic Crimes, as well as its I now need my water, as I kind of like bundled it into a bowl. And look.
Hi.
Really spicy as you're trying to do, yeah, because I mentioned the race.
Spicy.
Today is brought to you by the word spicy. What are you laughing at? Did I say something funny?
Oh, we don't get expansions.
Those aren't expansions, those are all new games, mostly.
Sleeping Gods, Distant Sky.
Well, that was an all-in pledge.
That's
That's different.
we're and liars, because we pledge all in often.
Yeah, but we don't usually specifically like, oh, this is an expansion, let's go for it.
True, we do not.
Like if you're doing a steakhouse. Hi.
Hi. How about some of our other app? Check out some of our other videos. I don't know why I can never say that. Schmanton, you.
Just say it now.
And if you've enjoyed this content, apparently I can't. I think I have. And if you've